Good evening. It's so nice to see everyone here tonight. I'm Cynthia Moreno. I'm Director of Learning and Engagement at the Mint, and we are so excited about the program tonight with Tara and Tim and Rebecca. I'd like to start out tonight by reading a land acknowledgement statement for the Mint. Tonight, we'd like to acknowledge that the Mint Museum stands on colonized land, traditionally home to the Catawba, Shirwa, Sugaree, and Waxhaw, and all other indigenous people who resided, met, and traded here. The Mint also acknowledges the unpaid and hidden labor of enslaved peoples of African descent who helped build the Mint Museum at Randolph Road at various stages in the building's history. Another announcement I wanted to make tonight, in solidarity with our friends in Western North Carolina, the Mint is donating a portion of its October admissions funds to the Craft Emergency Fund for artists who've been impacted. And we're also giving free admission to anyone in a 5-state radius who's had been impacted by Helene as well. And our prayers go out for people in both Asheville and also North Carolina tonight. So tonight, I had the pleasure of getting to introduce one of my favorite people, Rebecca Elliott, who's our Associate Curator of Craft Design and Fashion. I've had 12 years of wonderful experiences with Rebecca, and I've been so inspired by her scholarship, her inventiveness. She's kind of a piece of pure poetry in terms of what she pulls out and discovers with people. Rebecca has a master's degree from University of Chicago in art history, and her undergraduate was Smith College, also in art history. She came to us from the Houston Museum of Fine Arts, and the array of favorite exhibits and projects is very long, and I won't go too far into that, but some of the most recent ones that Rebecca has done in terms of publication. In addition to objects of affection, Craft in the Lab and the Science of Making Things, Craft Across Continents, William Ivy Long costume designs, and of course, we'll never forget body embellishment. And what's so fascinating is watching Rebecca work and teasing out and discovering so many aspects of the collaborations that went on and the mentorships with objects of affection. And knowing that she did this in the middle of the pandemic, when it was probably a difficult time to be having conversations and connecting with people. She was working with Ron Porter and Joe Price, as well as Bob, and having numerous conversations with the numerous students and now professors, I'm sure, that he mentored that are called the Bobettes. So without, I probably screwed that up, but without further ado, I'd like to welcome Rebecca.
Hi, thank you, Cynthia, for that lovely introduction. Thank you all for being here. And I'm just here to introduce Tim and Tara. Tim is a professor at East Carolina University. He got his undergraduate degree at the Rochester Institute of Technology as BFA, and then he got his MFA from the University of Massachusetts at Dartmouth. He's been teaching at ECU since 2004, and he's professor and medals coordinator. And I also know from his Instagram he's quite a cook and quite a craftsperson in many different areas, carpentry and all sorts of things. And he consistently has won praise from ECU graduates for his problem solving and engineering and design thinking skills. That's something that they mentioned specifically about him over and over. And I had the pleasure of meeting Tim at several of the ECU symposiums over the years. So it'll be a treat to hear about his work. And then Tara Locklear got her BFA from ECU in 2012 after a previous career in restaurant management. And she has been an active studio artist, a full-time studio artist since graduating. She has gotten a lot of acclaim. She's had her work shown and sold at the American Crafts Council's very prestigious fairs all over the country. Her work, both of their works, both artists have work in various museum collections around the country. They've also exhibited abroad, and many people here probably have work by Tara or have seen it on view. I'm wearing my earrings that I bought of hers recently, and I know Anne in the audience has Tara's works on. So I'm very pleased to introduce both artists. And who is speaking first? I didn't hear. Okay, so Tara will be speaking first, and then we'll have questions. We'll have Tim, and then questions afterward. Thank you all so much. Come on up.
Thank you. And that's very comforting, so thank you for that. Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for spending this Wednesday evening here at the Mint Museum with me and my friend and former professor, Tim Lazure. I am honored to be able to share a little bit about my work through the winding paths in my community and with my craft family. I would also like to thank curator Rebecca Elliott and Maggie Capitan for the invitation to speak as part of this exhibition of Objects of Affection, the jewelry from the Robert Ebendorf collection, from the Porter Price collection artist series. Looking at my work today, I see a roadmap filled with timestamps of where my mind has been within my jewelry and where it is headed. Always presenting the moments of shifts and places of thought. From the early learnings while at East Carolina University up to today, researching and attempting new processes to harness the vocabulary to materialistically convey my message has always been a way to archive mentally and physically where I was, where I'm going, and where I have deeply rooted my intentions and purpose within my jewelry practice. A practice that has been driven by the reoccurring question, what if? A question that has led to many investigations and problem solving, which also has prompted several moments in my early studies, as I know my former professor, Tim Lazure, can attest to. Recent collection. So the process drives my inquisitive nature, so it is no wonder I have drawn to broken skateboards, humble diamonds in the rough, evidence of attempts and intention. Layers of precision wood design placed under pressure, visually emboldened, steeped in community, with deep memories and continual possibilities, pushing that same never-ending question of what if? My current exhibition, Possibilities, Ease, which is currently on view at Dransfield Jewelers in Richmond, Virginia, is a response to that specific question that is at times all-consuming in my studio thoughts. It is a moment that captures the lingering thoughts hallmarked in my sketchbooks through the years of exploring moments, visions, thoughts and desires of playing with attempts of new footprints in my material's path. Taking a pause to use this material, my reclaimed skateboards, to answer playfully through process, breaking my own rules of order intended to keep my mind focused. Allowing my doodles to come into a playful reality, each one becoming a timestamp on that continuous design line that has no specific direction. That is what I believe play can be, a conduit to more daydreams, distractions, and discoveries. My time at ECU was also a time of play, a time of exploration, and a time of much discovery. The work started in a place where I was selfishly trying to convey my own dreams in forms of jewelry that I wanted to wear. Always fumbling awkwardly through the rough formats that told an early story of the thoughts with a yearning of question of value, but grew into a desire to express way more and learn how I could convey that. The real journey of learning to express those desires began. To learn how to make the work feel the way I envisioned it and felt inside. Searching for wearable formats re-envisioned in my mind and helped me find comfort and direction in the mental chaos. Always forcing me to look back in my personal memories where I found guidance and much needed structure to sort the vast number of ideas running in my head that my hands and my skill set couldn't keep up with. Shape and math became those very necessary starting points. I have been rooted in using shape as a formal dialogue of learning since a very young age, with a strong passion for geometry. Shape has always been something that I needed to learn from in order to convey with almost to a fault. To me, shape has its own value system. Without a material identity mixed into it and you look solely at the linear aspect of a shape, it has another layer within it and its said value system. Playing with this conversation in my studio allows me to hear what the shapes want to convey. Shape also can be very recognizable, such as in these cushion-cut triple gem earrings or the Briolette OG cut dangles on these Gemark triple dangles, pictured here from the grouping of the Pop Rocks Collection's earrings designs. Shape can also incite desire, stress, and comfort. It can also be a form only understood by the onlooker, which then brings that shape to life for them. My signature collection, Pop Rocks, mostly made from my material of choice, reclaimed skateboards, comprised of my visual interpretations of geometric prime polygons, made its debut at ACC Baltimore in 2013 after completing my undergrad at East Carolina in 2012. My shapes in singularity create a sense of play, like the gem threaders here on the left, but form together to create another shape, expands a more questioning thought as in the parallelogram brooch on the right. The interpretive gem structures as seen in the teardrop gem collet on the left, paired with the teardrop hinge chain in the middle, accompanied by the round cut double strand collet, conveys the root meaning of my body of work, pushing the boundaries and questioning what is a gem. This shape alone has given me resolve from an angered past and brings comfort of striking visual jewelry memories from a long ago as a young girl, building its own commentary on what jewelry forms can be. Traveling and being able to observe this idea through my work, such as the Rubble of Gems collection cluster necklace shown here, along with the Foundation Collection edition number 7 necklace, allowed me to see and make these conclusions. Therefore, every time a shape enters my thoughts, whether I'm designing on paper or mentally pondering, I immediately give it its own identity and create its own vernacular. This is so I can converse with the other shapes in my already existing catalog of shapes within my production and limited edition work. It helps me to know how I want to move forward with it. Each shape and how it creates the larger form have a design hierarchy in my studio practice. It is how I give myself rules and structure to harness the chaos and the creativity that's always in my mind. Continually working to create new forms with my reclaimed skateboards has never waned because of its ever-evolving relationship with me. As I grow in my scope of trying to push that material, how it can be and what it is seen as jewelry through the lens of it, the material is almost like a sketchbook. It holds its own importance in color, which has the weight of another material in the equation of jewelry beyond its aesthetic value. It is truly representative of my DNA and materiality. The ongoing relationship with my skateboard community through their material pushes me to continue presenting them in its highest format and manner that I can. Learning to make my work through those ECU years of practice, play, and learned process gave me the tools to say what my thoughts were screaming from the inside in forms of jewelry. Jewelry made with thoughts of what is value, what is important. Is it monetary, is it memory, or is it both? Can it be both? Having it presented and seen with a place to be heard at the viewer's level. Jewelry allows all of those opportunities in so many ways. And when you aren't tending to it, it's already there. At a conference during my ECU years, a contemporary jewelry artist and friend whom I truly admire, Jillian Moore, stated it so brilliantly when she spoke of her work entering the world and what art jewelry really is. She said, "Art jewelry is so democratic because it is outside of the gallery and it's in the streets and it's on people." I feel the same sentiment as a similar essence of graffiti, which is definitive yet subjective public art that is for the masses. Democratic, free, and very poignant. Graffiti can go up and be gone in an hour, one of my favorite aspects of what I love the most. My jewelry gave me a way to grieve, celebrate, and say exactly what I was going through, just like graffiti. It allowed me to eventually unlearn notions I had upheld stubbornly and open my eyes to the depths of what jewelry can achieve beyond what it is meant to be. And the production is the output of exactly that, and that found joy that continues that thread of intention, one design at a time. The investigation of play through geometry began later in my studio practice. Following the footsteps of the signature Pop Rocks collection, my second collection configuration emerged and took shape. Facing the formality of familiar shapes such as circles and quadrilaterals, then dissecting them to dig deeper to see what the shape revealed was the premise of the collection. During my first years learning those processes at ECU is where I would then use those processes to formulate my materials into a language and take those intentions and focus to a new realm of thinking within the work. It gave me hope and new challenges that took precedence and gave my initial bitter jewelry journey a new outlook. This is how I knew my healing and purpose had changed. Being in that environment around individuals that at that time, I had no idea the impact and connection they would have on me and my work, or how they have revealed themselves to be of the core foundation in my studio practice, which is community. A word that broadens the path in which the jewelry has traveled and grown. And it began with each of my professors, then grew into the faces that surrounded me daily in the studio, then fast forward became a part of my personal life today. Those same faces that are fond craft family, as I refer to call all of them, and who Bob would always refer to. He would often state, "Look around you. These are the faces you hope that are with you along your jewelry journey." This is where it begins. Community, a word that is also embedded in the DNA of my mentor and friend, Robert Ebendorf. With his support, conversations, and push to always get me to explore and question what was in front of me and always push the work forward. Never in a direct manner, which is not Bob, but in a way that always made you have that aha moment when you didn't even know you were looking for it or you actually needed it. The bauble piece shown here on view in the current exhibition, Objects of Affection, as well as being in the Mint Museum's permanent collection, which I'm honored to be, is the epitome of where my hands materially had been and where many of my bench conversations had taken place with Bob. And it's all expressed through this piece and all the materials that it consists of. The remnants of failed and successful attempts to reach my goals around material language that my ever-moving thoughts made it hard for my hands to keep up with. Through similar conversations at my bench at ECU, Ron Porter and Joe Price became the part of my jewelry journey very early in the years. Starting with conversations and insight into my work in the early years with their vast knowledge and true passion of contemporary jewelry, which later included the acquisition of the visual interpretation observation brooch shown here in the Porter Price collection. It is truly, truly an honor to be included in such an expansive collection of contemporary jewelry amongst many of my mentors, heroes, and craft family. They have become an extension of my craft family with deep-rooted friendships that have continued to this day. My work began in a place where community was embedded, and it was celebrated, and it was vital. A place that introduced me to places that extended beyond that same community, beyond those school walls and benches. It took me to craft shows, conferences, far-reaching craft communities, and schools. Filled with some of the familiar faces of my beginnings, but expanded into connections. My work has also been driven and incited through conversations. It has evolved through various formats and scale, but never diverting from passion of material investigation, a core intention to this day in the collections. And it's no wonder that my material, Reclaimed Skateboards, is founded also in community. Through a project to create a modern-day reliquary presented by Tim Lazure while at ECU is where my material of choice, upcycled skateboards, came to life. This very project set in motion the steps that would start my journey with my skateboard community and presented itself to me at that time when I needed community the most, and it would change my perception of materials and value. While I was working at a local tattoo shop, I would hear people talk about their skateboards and humanize them. Oh, my deck just died. My deck just kicked the bucket. I had never heard anyone objectify an object with such emotion. The way people talked about their decks, it was fascinating to me. I sat down and interviewed about 13 of my friends who skated because I wanted to know more about the ethos of that passion. When I talked to them, they talked about all the affirmations that they had had about themselves, along with each of their personal connections to skateboarding. Those answers woke up my connections to my skateboarding past, along with my personal passions and dreams that had been buried during my time in corporate. It was such a pivotal moment that I knew I wanted to say something about this community and how I wanted to honor them and their intentional mark making, which is the hallmark of each rider with the objects I started to create with. These markings recording each of their personal memories, hearkening back to my early investigations of what is precious, thus creating the trajectory of my path I am still discovering today in my studio practice. Seeing where the work has found itself through its wearers and how it has evolved through the emotional connections placed upon the jewelry by these owners is more than I could have ever imagined. Designing the work initially from a place of personal loss, confusion, and anger, and then to have it form an emotional connection of empowerment and joy to others is way more than I could ask for and can only hope that it continues. And these are just my goals and dreams. My work is very cyclical, from sketchbook doodles to renderings to maquettes, which lead to new possibilities, then to produce, and then to sell, and then to wear, and then back again. Thus fulfilling that desire to repeat all of these steps to see what the new outcome will be. Thank you.
Thanks for coming tonight. My name's Tim Lazure. I'm over at in Eastern North Carolina in Greenville. I teach over at ECU. Before I begin, I want to thank the Mint Museum for having me and Tara here tonight, especially Rebecca and staff. And also special thanks to Ron and Joe for collecting so many pieces that are in Bob's exhibition. And also Baxter that you see here. If any of you guys know Ron and Joe, you know that Baxter's a pretty important part. And we're also here because of Bob, and Bob's very special to me. We taught for about 13 years together. And when I was hired at ECU, it was sort of a privilege because Bob taught two of my professors, in New Paltz, when he was teaching up in New Paltz. So he taught one of my undergrad professors and one of my graduate school professors. So it was kind of an honor for me to be able to teach with him and have him as a mentor. I also want to kind of mention our neighbors out in Western North Carolina. And as I was putting this together, I was like, well, when was the last time I spent a lot of time with Bob? And it was 2 summers ago. I saw him at the opening, but that was one night, and things were happening. And so me, Bob, Ron, and Joe did a artist sort of getaway at our friend Beth's house, and she lives in Western North Carolina, and her house was actually washed away during the hurricane. So, just hearts go out to them, and then people down in, fingers crossed about Florida, we know what's going to happen. I do teach over at ECU, and we have a lot of different programs over there. We're one of the biggest art programs. And that program was started by John Satterfield, and I believe the Mint Museum has one of his pieces. I've never met John, but rumor has it is that the first metals class at East Carolina University was held in a pool. So the pool was emptied, and they put equipment and benches down in a swimming pool. And so that's kind of the starting of our program. You've never heard that?
I never heard.
Yeah. And then Linda joined the program in 1990, and she worked with John. And then in 2011, she's now runs the study abroad program. And these two, I've been probably with MESEC the longest, probably a little over 20 years we've taught together. And Ken Bova was also part of our program. Okay, so that's a little bit of history about ECU. And I tend to play in the jewelry studio, in the wood shop, and in the steel shop. Probably started what I was doing because of this gentleman. He's my grandfather, the one closest to me. He was a tool and die maker in the American Optical, which is a larger eyeglass thing up in Massachusetts. And this is one of the machines that he was very proud of. It was one of the first air-powered machines that they had in their factory. I've been using my hands for a long period of time. I started at a young age. Actually, the first kind of use of my hands was right after 8th grade. I was working for a carpenter's assistant. So it was actually carpentry that got me going, which was kind of illegal if you think about it, because that's 8th grade, and I worked for him for 3 or 4 years, so I learned a lot of that process. I got into art because my brother, this is not my brother, but this is a set that he has designed. He for a long period of time, he worked for Wheelock College, and they had a children's theater, and so this was one of the sets he designed. He also did some costume design, and he also does art. So this is a piece where he had these illustrations, and he would collect Christmas balls, and he would crack them, and one at a time, and you can kind of see it's a mosaic of his, and so like everything but the arms and legs is Christmas balls and rendered in Christmas. Yeah, so he has hundreds of Christmas balls that he collects all these antique ones. And so he got me into thinking about art, and then I started doing actually started going to art school for photography. So these are some of my early photos, and I was breaking into abandoned buildings in Rochester, New York. And I really enjoyed the sort of the latent history of the building, and like what happened in this building. It made me think about, like, it got me sort of interested in, like, I guess like a longing for sort of like an industrial revolution and back what was, happening there. So I did like photography, but I knew it was going towards more computer stuff. And I am very much hands-on. And right down the hall was the American School of Craft. And so that's where I got into metalsmithing. I had a pretty technical, this is my second class in metals, a pretty technical background at Rochester Institute of Technology. So these are just a few pieces that I did while I was an undergrad. Serving spoon, a little shot glass. While I was there, I got the privilege to work for Leonard Urso, who was one of my faculty members and one of Bob's students. Which gave me the chance to work on some pretty cool pieces. So these are just a few shots from his studio. Leonard is the one shaking the little dog's hand. And that's me as a wee undergrad. It also gave me the opportunity to work on projects that I wasn't able to afford to work on. So this is the mace for Bucknell College, and he allowed me to do about 90% of the work on this. The only thing Leonard did was that medallion in the middle, and he let me raise and spin and create the rest of it. While I was at Rochester Institute of Technology, Albert Paley, you guys might have heard of him, he's a pretty well-known blacksmith. He was local, and so a couple of his employees came and gave us a demonstration on how to weld and grind steel. And so when I was a third-year metals student, this was my first metals, kind of my first metals piece. I started making it, I made about half of it, and it was all warped, so I stopped and I remade it. So it's my first finished steel piece. So I guess my final 2 years, I started making some furniture in undergrad. I also was able to get this commission while I was in undergrad. It was for it was a torch and for the Empire State Games, which is sort of a pre-Olympic event up in New York. And this allowed me to sort of start setting up my studio. So I was able to buy a welder and some grinders and kind of get myself situated. Then I went to grad school, and Alan Burton Thompson, who was also a student of Bob's when he was at New Paltz, was my professor there, and Stephen Whittlesley, and they got me thinking about recycled materials. So in both of their works, they were using, like Alan was using old cameos and all different buttons and different things in his work, and Steve was finding all this wood out in Cape Cod and incorporating that into his pieces. So I started thinking about recycled materials. And so when I was in grad school, I was experimenting a little bit with that. I went to grad school in a jewelry metals program, but I made furniture. It was sort of an open-minded program. I went there because when I was an undergrad, when I was a senior, I actually started teaching some classes. I was assisting a graduate student. I think it was because Leonard didn't trust the grad student. So I was thinking about teaching as a career. And so I went to a metals jewelry program because I wanted to teach, but I was really into making furniture. And so this is a recycled vacuum cleaner that I made into a cabinet that would light up from underneath, and it had that lamp that would come out. Some earlier furniture pieces. Again, using some reclaimed wood. And where I went to school was in an old mill building. And again, I think sort of my photos that I was taking in undergrad kicked in again, and that got my mind turning. And I was looking at a lot of the objects sort of in the basement and throughout the building. It was an old textile building. It was just these odd things. I really like this picture because I had hair. But some of the things. And then I was also looking at some photography. This is a German couple that were photographing blast furnace and water towers. And that led to this piece in school. And so I was being definitely inspired by a lot of these objects that I was finding around the building and creating visual relationships with. And I was thinking about how furniture reacts with the building. And so I started kind of connecting the furniture to the building, like you might see, like a building has systems, right? So you have water, you have air, kind of like the human body. So I was making a correlation between that and building in person, I guess. And so my fabrication skills started getting a little bit better, a little bit more proficient. This is a little bench. The top 2 inches is maple, carved maple, and the legs are maple, and the rest is the steel fabricated. And I've always taken on commissions, so this is my first gold piece that I got in grad school. And the lady came up to me and she was like, "Tim, I love your work. Can you make me something in the style of Art Nouveau?" And I was like, well, that's really not like my work, but yes, I can, of course I can. So this was my creative problem solving. So I'm bringing a little bit of my work and a little bit of Art Nouveau. And I also, while I was in school, I was doing a lot of commission work. So these sort of kept me paying the bills. So I was doing furniture parts and pieces for designers up in Boston. And then I was able to this was my first large project, which allowed me to set up a studio. So I was hired me and a business partner was hired this is right after we graduated, we set up a studio. We were paying $400 a month for a 40 by 60 foot space up in New Bedford, Massachusetts. And we got this one commission to make 40 display units for a telecommunication company down in Texas. And so this was the process, and it was a big learning process of what not to do. So we had a month and a half to make these. So whenever my students start complaining about putting in time, we kept track of the time to see how much money we made. We didn't make much money per hour, but we bought $10,000 a piece for a month and a half. That isn't bad back in 2000 and whenever. But I was working 95 hours a week on this project for a month and a half. But we got it out, got it set up, and then right after that, I stayed there for up in New Bedford. I was running a business, and I was working part-time for Rhode Island School Design. They hired me to be a shop technician in their steel furniture program. Then all of a sudden, I got a call from this guy, and they were looking for someone down at ECU, and apparently he had called one of my professors for somebody else, and they were like, well, did Tim Lazure apply for the job? So I owe a lot for Bob for reaching out, and it's kind of funny, we used the same picture. I saw Tara's picture out there. I was like, well, okay. So I got hired down at ECU, and it was a big move for me. I was very privileged to work with Bob. And so I was going into a metals jewelry program, so I thought, I probably should start making some smaller things. So I was like, well, yeah. Hammering, I learned a lot of hammering from Leonard. And so hammering is one of my processes that I really enjoy doing. And then I started entering some different exhibitions. This was for the Velvet Da Vinci Gallery out in West Coast. They were having an anti-war show. And I was using a lot of found object in my larger work, but being around Bob, I was like, well, I can do this with some of my smaller works. I started incorporating some of the found object work, and I really like sort of the design process that comes with working with found objects, where I have drawers and drawers of things that people give me, and I'll lay out my favorite parts and pieces, and then I start playing around with them, and they kind of speak to you, and they might inform concept, they might inform design. And so I started incorporating some of the found objects into my jewelry. Right. And some of them take a life of their own. Somebody had given me a set of dental samples, and so I started using them in some pieces, and so they became a little bit more narrative and sort of almost like self-portraits in a way, where I was thinking, with this series of work, I was thinking about how we kind of awkwardly move through time and space, and sort of how our lives are, kind of strange. So this series it was sort of movement, but then sort of awkward movement. You can kind of imagine things kind of jumping along, or rolling with a square wheel. I also tend to like to learn things. So I was using a lot of found objects, but I also wanted to start learning more in-depth stone setting. So I took a couple classes in stone setting and was teaching myself stone setting, more for my students, but then when I'm putting it with sort of trash, it kind of creates a hierarchy of material. And I really love that juxtaposition of, a washer next to these really fancy set stones. So that kind of slowly crept into the work. But then I always would go back to also hammering as well. Hammer forming is more of a pleasure for me. I tend to make work for different reasons. I like engineering, I like putting things together, so when I'm working with the found objects, I think about the metalwork and like, how can I connect these things in a clever way? When I'm thinking about vessel working, it's more process. So I just enjoy the process of taking a flat sheet of metal and with hammers bringing it up into a vessel and then altering it. So I'll make different types of work for different reasons. And it's nice to be able to play in the wood studio, in the steel shop, in the jewelry shop, with a hammer in my hand, or with chasing tools. So these were all done with all just hammers. And these are done with chasing and reprise, which is taking little chasing tools, which are basically little hammers, and decorating the surface. And I'm really into sort of embellishing the surface with lots of texture and lush, rich things. And I also, I'll go back to the steel shop and make some items. Nowadays, I'm making a lot more functional things for the school. So reclaimed wood. My first iron cast ECU, the sculpture program does a lot of iron casting, and I think this was the first time I took part in that. So it was a mold of a leg and cast. I also enjoy making a lot of rings. As far as jewelry goes, I think I probably make more rings than anything else. And again, I like working with found objects, but I also do more fine jewelry too. So it's sort of this back and forth. I love process. I love creating finely crafted objects, which lend itself great for people who want to buy engagement rings and stuff like that. So I'm very familiar and like that, but it's also, when I think about these objects, like on the left is an engagement ring made with a fancy, I think it was a pink sapphire or something like that with diamonds going around, 18 karat gold. So really, kind of expensive material, but then right next to it is something, it's a silver ring with a washer in it. So it's sort of that, value, what's valued in sort of the industry versus. So sometimes I make work kind of to poke fun at the industry in a way, where I'm using all these recycled materials, but maybe I'll throw in a diamond or something next to it to kind of create that conversation between expensive and inexpensive. Where these are both wedding bands, but one is obviously for a certain clientele and another one is for another clientele. This was one of my favorite commissions. This was Clay and Pebble were their names, and they lived in western North Carolina, right near Pocosin Art Center. And Clay was this gentleman, older gentleman, about yay tall. I was wearing this big leather jacket, and he was like, "Tim, can you make me a ring with a lot of bling?" So this is a pinky ring for this gentleman. And so he gave me the ruby, and I was like, "Yeah, I can do that for you." So that was my solution to that. This was my first present I gave to my wife. We started dating, and then a week later, Linda Darty had asked me to teach a class out in Italy, which how could I refuse? So we dated for like a week or two, and then I left for a month and a half. And so while I was there, I found this washer in Rome on the ground. So I made that while I was in Italy. Second time I went to Italy, she came with me, and we found this nail in Pompeii. And so I got back, and this was her engagement ring. So Sarah and I also have done some collaborations. I was taught how to do some photo decals, and so I came back, and she works with images, some photography, but a lot of collage. So I took a couple of her images, and I made these two pieces. And so we're like, this could be kind of fun. So we did an artist in residency, and this is some of the work from that. So we went to Paducah, where is Paducah? Thank you, Kentucky. Yeah, that was a question. We went to Paducah, Kentucky, and we did a couple, 2 or 3 weeks out there. And so we photographed the town, then we made some panels, and then we also did some brooch work with that too. And so these were all sort of inspired by the town. It was a town along the river, and they had done this really interesting thing with the arts where they had all these properties, and if you had a business plan and you wanted to live there for 5 years, you could buy a piece of property for $1. And so we had a couple, Shand and Mitch, who graduated from ECU, were out there, and they had bought a property and then the next door. And so it was sort of this rebuilding kind of town. And so we took that inspiration and kind of ran with it a little bit. So some of these pieces, like this was a map of the town. This was one of the houses, but then on the back of the brooch, it was sort of a ladder, sort of a metaphor for the growing town in a way. I also have sort of a weird. I make a fair amount of belt buckles, and so these are some of the belt buckles I've made. And while I was making these, one of my colleagues saw the chase. I teach a class in chasing and repoussé, and this is one of the samples we do. And so usually I'll go through the process of making this, and I have the class follow along with me. And so I end up with all these bugs. So I was making belt buckles with them, and she saw some of the bugs and was like, "Hey, let's do a collaborative." And I was like, "All right." So that sounds cool. So we took two of the ones that we chased, and this is a piece, probably one of my more current pieces. And we just got into the Alchemy 7 show with it. So it was my first collaboration with Misuk. So she did all the painted enamels over the top of the belt buckle, and I did the metal work. And I often make work for exhibitions, which it can be kind of a fun way to allow yourself to maybe make a little bit more elaborate piece. This is a piece that we did with Edinburgh University. We teamed up with a partner over there, and so we sent them some objects, and they sent us some objects. One of the objects that I got from Sue Mandalora was whiskers from her kitty cats that had passed. And so I was kind of honored to get them. She kind of didn't want to give me them, and I don't blame her, because the piece that I gave her was actually something from John Satterfield, which meant a lot to me. And so she made the piece out of that. I made the piece out of her whiskers. And so this is a little boat with ebony on it. And the funny thing is, after the show happened, she asked if we'd like to trade. So I actually got the piece back, and she was able to get her whiskers, which was pretty cool. Another piece that was made specifically for our exhibition, Boris Bally has run the Imagine piece I think he's done 4 different versions of this, and it's about gun control, where he gave, for this exhibition in particular, he gave about close to 100 people, 100 artists, guns, and they kind of interpreted however they wanted to with that, which I found pretty interesting, because it wasn't all gun control. It was like there were some people, like there was people who were in the NRA, so it was also about like gun education, and and so this was the first piece I had done for that. And then there was another exhibition that took place a little after that. I think there was only about 20 or 30 of us in this exhibition. And so this was a sort of a little bit more heavy of a piece. So this one represented, I was looking at some statistics, and it was kids under 13 who passed from gunfire. And so I had set stones representing each one of those child, which actually I had to go through physical therapy because I was trying to finish this piece, because setting all these stones was so intensive. And it kind of ruined my shoulder for a little bit, which was pretty interesting. Anyway, so that's kind of my work. But what I spend a fair amount of my time doing, which, people think, oh, you teach, you have your summers off, you can make lots of work. So this is my latest creation. So we emptied out our graduate studio, and I get as much, creative joy designing and making, like designing this studio and then recreating it. So the 3 of us actually, we built walls. Then I designed some benches, and we actually built benches. Right. And so this is what happened this past summer. And this is their spaces. So they have these nice brand new spaces for the graduate students. And I think probably my biggest accomplishment has to do with people who graduate from our program, right? And a lot of them become educators. A lot of them become studio artists. Educators and studio artists. And they're getting out there in the field, and oh, who's this? Now this one right here, this is when she was a student, and we'd often have critiques in my kitchen, like the end of the year critiques, and we'd have a little meal, and so, I was trying on one of Tara's pieces during that one. And it's amazing how many students graduated from our program are of making it in the field, and I'm really, really proud of that fact. Some of them direct craft schools, and they also learn a lot of, we've been having the Material Topics Symposium for, I think we're on year 13 or 14, and so they learn how to organize events and build community. So thank you very much for having me tonight.